When I arrived, the house smelled like lemon polish and old books, but it felt empty without Dad. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, tanned from some recent resort trip, barely glancing at me. Mom poured herself way more wine than usual, her hands trembling. I tried gently asking about Dad's will. Mom froze. "We're just not ready yet," she said, her eyes flicking to Naomi. Naomi just smirked. She knew my sister hated me. But I didn't know how far she'd go until she slid a birthday gift across the table, laughed, and said loudly enough for every fork in the room to stop midair. "Maybe this will explain why you're another man's mistake." It was a DNA test. I swallowed the shame, mailed the kit the next morning, and waited. Months later, our family's estate lawyer requested an urgent meeting. My mother went pale. My sister, Naomi, stopped smiling. And in that moment, sitting in a cold, mahogany-paneled office in Denver, I realized something terrifying. They already knew what the DNA test was going to say. But they didn't know what my father was about to say from beyond the grave. Most people picture family as a soft place to land. Mine always felt more like a house with cold floors, beautiful from the outside, but freezing once you stepped in. If you've ever been the forgotten child in your family, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. My name is Grace Ellington, and I spent my entire life learning how to make myself small so my mother wouldn't sigh and my sister wouldn't sneer. The Golden Child versus the Ghost. Growing up, Naomi's world seemed to orbit at the center of everything. She had a way of commanding attention without ever earning it. Loud laughter, dramatic stories, a talent for turning every room into her personal stage. And my mother, Evelyn, applauded her every move. When Naomi got a B on a test, Mom called her well-rounded. When I brought home straight A's, Mom blinked like she had forgotten who I was for a second, before saying, "That's nice, Grace. Can you help set the table?" By the time I reached 35, I had built a quiet, successful life as a financial analyst in Austin, Texas. I dressed in neutral tones and tried not to think about the constant ache of being the forgotten daughter. But when my father, James Ellington, passed away, the gravity of my family pulled me back to Denver. Dad had been the only steady thing in that house. A man of few words, but surprising warmth. A proud nod at my college graduation. A quiet hand on my shoulder. I didn't know then that he was carrying a secret darker than anything I could imagine. 3 months after his funeral, Mom insisted on having a small birthday dinner for me at the old house. Her voice on the phone was too bright, too rehearsed. It looked like she knew a secret I didn't. The birthday gift. Looking back, that dinner was never about celebrating my birthday. It was a stage perfectly set for my humiliation. Halfway through the meal, Naomi leaned back, her eyes glinting. "So, Grace," she said sweetly. "Still working at that same firm in Austin?" Before I could answer, she jumped into a story about her own plans to renovate her kitchen. It wasn't a question, it was a reminder that I was just background noise. But there was something else simmering beneath her smug expression. Anticipation. When Mom stood up to bring out a cheap, store-bought cake she hadn't even bothered to take out of the plastic, Naomi pushed her chair back dramatically. "Actually," Naomi said, reaching for a glossy box wrapped in silver paper. "I brought a birthday gift. Something I think you'll find enlightening." Mom's face instantly drained of color. "Naomi," she warned. But Naomi ignored her, sliding the box across the table toward me like it was a weapon. "Go on," she said, her smile razor-thin. "Open it." I peeled back the paper. Inside was a DNA testing kit. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Naomi leaned in, laughing under her breath. "Maybe this will explain why you're another man's mistake in this family." The words echoed, sharp and deliberate. Mom flinched. But she said absolutely nothing. The humiliation stung, but it was the pure terror in my mother's eyes that shook me. Naomi hadn't just insulted me. She had exposed a truth she wasn't supposed to say out loud. Later that night, searching through old boxes in my childhood bedroom, I found a photograph hidden in the back of a closet. It was my mother, much younger, holding me as a baby. Standing next to her was a man I didn't recognize. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 2 words, "Forgive me." I took photos of everything. And the next morning, I mailed the DNA kit. Not because Naomi wanted me to, but because I needed to know what truth she was so eager to weaponize. The results. 5 weeks later, the results hit my phone. No biological relationship detected with the Ellington family. Suggested match, the Hartman lineage. A name I had never heard in my life. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It actually felt like confirmation of something I had always sensed. I was a guest in my own childhood. I took a screenshot of the results and sent it to our family group chat with a simple question. Does anyone want to explain this? Mom called instantly, sobbing. Not from remorse, but from panic. Grace, sweetheart, please delete that. You don't understand. Things happened a long time ago. We moved past them. She didn't apologize. She just begged me to bury the truth so she wouldn't look bad. But Naomi didn't call. She texted 4 words, well, now you know. I called her, my hands shaking. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding irritated. Why, Naomi? I demanded. Why humiliate me like this? She laughed softly, a sound that hit like ice. Because I've kept this family secret for 20 years. Because Mom owed me. Because you've played the victim long enough. And now, the right people will finally get what they deserve. She hung up. Those words clung to me. The right people will get what they deserve. The next morning, I started asking quiet questions. I spoke to family friends and old neighbors. What I found out chilled me to the bone. Naomi had been digging around for months, meeting with estate lawyers, hinting about upcoming changes, and talking as if our father's massive estate already belonged entirely to her. She thought that proving I wasn't Dad's biological daughter would legally cut me out of the will. I needed real help. I hired Sarah, a cutthroat attorney known for complicated inheritance disputes. I showed her the DNA results, the hidden photo, and Naomi's texts. Sarah took notes, her expression perfectly still. Your instincts are right, she said finally. This isn't just resentment. Your sister is building a case to legally erase you. 3 days later, Mr. Dalton, our family's longtime estate lawyer, called. He sounded unusually formal. Grace, he said. Your father left instructions for a will reading under specific circumstances. Those circumstances have now been met. I think you should be prepared for what you are going to hear. The morning of the will reading, Denver felt bitterly cold. Sarah and I arrived early at Mr. Dalton's downtown office. We chose seats near the window, out of the direct line of fire. Mom arrived next, looking exhausted. She didn't even meet my eyes, sinking into a chair at the far end of the long mahogany table. Then Naomi strutted in. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. She wore an expensive cream-colored suit and heavy makeup. She had brought her own attorney, a guy I recognized from aggressive billboard ads. Naomi gave me a slow, smug smile, her eyes gleaming. She fully believed she had already won. Mr. Dalton entered last, carrying a thick folder. He stood at the head of the table and looked at each of us. Before we begin, Dalton said, his voice grave, I want to note that James Ellington left explicit instructions for how this reading should proceed. He anticipated complications. Everything I am about to share was prepared with full knowledge of circumstances that some of you may find surprising. Naomi's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Dalton opened the folder. I, James Robert Ellington, declare this my final will and testament. I leave 70% of my estate, including the family home, investment accounts, and assets, to my daughter, Grace Ellington. Silence snapped across the room like a whip. Naomi shot to her feet. She is not his daughter, she screamed, pointing at me. We have DNA proof. She has no legal claim. Dalton held up a hand. Please sit. There is more. Reluctantly, Naomi sank back down, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. Dalton continued reading. I have known since Grace was 2 years old that she is not my biological child. I chose to raise her anyway. I choose to leave her my legacy because she alone has proven worthy of it. This decision requires no further validation. Naomi's face drained to a pasty, sickly gray. Mom closed her eyes, tears leaking out. But my dad wasn't finished with Naomi. 8 months before his death, Dalton said, looking directly at my sister, Mr. Ellington hired a private investigator to document any attempts to manipulate or interfere with his estate. Dalton placed a massive stack of documents on the table. We have meeting logs demonstrating Naomi Ellington's efforts to pressure her father into altering his will. We have bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals totaling $50,000 made by Naomi during his final illness. Naomi's attorney stiffened. We weren't informed of this investigation, he snapped. You were not required to be, Dalton cut him off coldly. Additionally, the investigation documented consultations with 3 separate estate lawyers, and the purchase of a DNA test, mailed to Naomi's home address, and gift-wrapped. Naomi's eyes went wide. That's ridiculous, she stammered, her voice shaking. That was a joke. Dalton picked up a handwritten note in my father's unmistakable script. Mr. Ellington requested that I read this aloud. He looked at the paper. Naomi, I know what you've been planning. I watched you try to manipulate your mother. I hoped you would choose differently. These consequences are your own doing. A sound escaped Naomi's throat, part gasp, part growl. This is fraud, she spat, pointing wildly at me. Grace manipulated him. She tricked a dying man. Her attorney grabbed her arm, whispering harshly, do not contest this. There is a strict no contest clause. You will lose everything. Sarah, my attorney, stood up. Her voice was quiet but lethal. The will explicitly acknowledges Grace's parentage and documents Mr. Ellington's reasoning. Any contest by your client would be frivolous and immediately trigger the no contest clause. That includes the immediate repayment of all outstanding personal loans, which, according to the estate, total approximately $200,000. Naomi's face twisted in sheer panic. That's not a loan. He gave me that money. Not according to his financial records, Dalton replied calmly. Mom finally spoke, her voice a fragile whisper. Naomi, please. Stop. But Naomi was spiraling. Years of entitlement, bitterness, and fear collided all at once. This should be mine, she hissed, tears ruining her heavy makeup. All of it. I'm the real daughter. I'm the one who stayed. I stood up slowly, looking my sister dead in the eye. You didn't stay, Naomi, I said, my voice rock steady. You controlled. You threatened. You built your life on secrets you never earned. Naomi stared at me, wild-eyed and completely cornered. For the first time in her life, she looked incredibly small. Grace, Mr. Dalton said gently. There is one last thing your father left. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a short, handwritten letter. Grace, you spent your life believing you were invisible. You were not. I saw your strength, your kindness, and your integrity. You were my daughter, not by blood, but by choice. And I leave you my legacy with absolute certainty that you will honor it. The legal fallout came faster than anyone expected. Naomi's attorney withdrew from her case the very next morning, leaving her scrambling for anyone willing to fight a battle that was already lost. When her ego forced her to try and contest the will anyway, the judge dismissed it immediately. Within minutes, the no contest clause was triggered. Her 30% inheritance vanished entirely. The $200,000 gift she had taken from Dad was legally converted into personal debt owed back to my estate. And the $50,000 she had stolen during his illness? She was given exactly 1 year to repay it, or face criminal fraud charges. She had tried to leave me with nothing, and ended up bankrupting herself. Mom came to see me in Austin a week later. She sat on my couch, crying, and finally told me the truth about my biological father, a brief affair, an agreement made decades ago, and the guilt she had carried but never had the courage to confront. I listened. But I didn't hug her. Some wounds require distance, not closeness. I want to make things right, she whispered. I believe you, I told her. But making things right starts with letting me live my life without carrying your secrets anymore. I stepped back from Denver entirely. With Sarah's help, I managed the estate, sold the family home, and deliberately chose the life I wanted. It was the first time I had ever made a choice without worrying about who it might disappoint. I moved to Oregon, where it's quiet, green, and the lies can't reach me. Some endings aren't loud. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply choosing your own peace over their drama. If you've ever been the overlooked one in your family, know this: you deserve better than the people who fail to see your worth. Share your story in the comments below, and subscribe for more.